This happened about 9 years ago now. I am a college student and I was basically forced to move out on my own, which I didn't mind, but that meant finding a new roommate, which can be a daunting and scary experience. I've had a few weird encounters, but I think this one takes the cake. I posted on Craigslist looking for a bedroom in a shared house or apartment for $300 or less, and on my ad I mentioned, please no phone calls, only text or email, because I find being on the phone with someone I haven't had a chance to size up a really uncomfortable situation. I'm just awkward, I guess. Anyway, I got a call from a dude who clearly didn't read the no calls part, which I mentioned because this type of phone call was exactly the reason I don't like to talk to strangers on the phone. At first he was just pleasant and normal, told me he had a room available and relevant information like that. We started to talk about when and where we'd meet, and he started going on tangents about random stuff. I'm a combination of too interested in deep conversation and too awkward to end the call when it all started to get weird. So this call went on for 2 hours and we talked about the meaning of life and all kinds of weird shit. Honestly, this should have been the red flag, and I shouldn't have met with him, and of course I also should have grown a pair and told him I needed to leave. So, he wants me to meet him at his place and show me the room. I've since learned that you should really insist on meeting in public first. I got to his neighborhood and it was run down on the level that made the ghetto I grew up in look nice. Saggy front porches, hot cracked concrete, sad people with old beat up Lincolns. You get the picture. His house blended right in. The yard was seriously overgrown and the front door didn't work, so I went around back and just looked at the guy standing in the doorway, and seeing the kitchen behind him was enough to make me realize I really just wanted to leave. No way in hell. The guy in the doorway was a man with a sort of clown-style afro. He was leaning on a cane on his right side. His eyes looked crazy and his house smelled musty from 10 feet away. Again, I'm a coward, so instead of trusting my gut, I go inside and I'm polite, thinking, it's okay, it'll be over in 20 minutes and I can get the fuck out. I don't know what made me think this man who had a 2-hour conversation with me on the phone about life and philosophy would let me get away that easy. He took me up a flight of creaky steps into a small bedroom with no door and a mattress on the floor, and thought no way in hell would I live with a 40-something-year-old man being a 19-year-old female and have no door on my bedroom. But none of that mattered because my mind was made up before I even saw the room. I wouldn't have lived there for free, let alone for $200 a month. Things got weird. He tried to hold me hostage with conversation again. I think he was lonely. He talked about how some of his family were millionaires. He might have been delusional. The whole story seemed made up. Then he told me about an 18-year-old girl who also checked out the room and tried to have sex with him. Then he told me about his mom who hated white people, and it sounded like he sympathized with her. Obviously, that was super uncomfortable. Eventually, I was able to find a break in the conversation and plucked up the courage to make an excuse to leave. I was never so happy to leave a place in my life. I don't know if he was necessarily a sex offender or anything, but he really gave me the freaking creeps.
I really love Craigslist. I'd estimate I've met maybe 300 people for buying and selling stuff, and for the most part, everyone was nice and harmless. However, I did run into 2 creeps who made me rethink meeting strangers alone to sell stuff. FYI, I was an early 20s female at the time. First guy, it's 2009, and I'm staying with my parents for the Christmas holidays in a small town in Florida. I'm going through my childhood room and cleaning out the closet, and find a giant CD holder full of maybe 100 really shitty CDs. Think Nickelback, Aqua, Chumbawamba. It's the 21st century. No one uses CDs anymore. I figure I'd try to sell the CDs on Craigslist. I put up a listing. 100 CDs from the late 90s and early to mid 2000s. Mix of pop and rock. All for $35. OBO. The next day I get an email from a guy named John around 2 p.m. He says that he's in town temporarily and that he wants the CDs. He says he can pick them up after dinner around 8 p.m. I email him back my address and number and tell him to text or call when he's on his way. 8 p.m. comes and goes. I figure I've been stood up, which happens often on Craigslist. No big deal. My dad works for a liquor distribution company and would often do demonstration nights at restaurants and bars and would come home at bar closing time. This night, he gets home at around 3 a.m. I'm in college and a total night owl, so I'm still up probably eating junk food, surfing the web and watching horror flicks. I hear a car pull up, look out the window and see him sitting in his car eating food. He often stops at Taco Bell on his way home and eats it in his car so my mum doesn't know he's cheating on his diet. Maybe 10 minutes later, my dad comes in and shouts my name. "There is someone here to see you. Can you please tell me why a strange man is showing up at our house at 3 a.m? Huh? I go downstairs and my dad says some guy pulled up in the driveway and asked for me by name. I walk outside with my dad and this guy, who is maybe mid-30s, gets out of his car. He says he's the Craigslist guy who wanted to buy my CDs. My dad goes back in the house. I tell the guy it's really, really late to be stopping by, especially without texting first. However, since I'm awake, I go and grab the CDs. He then proceeds to drone on and on about why he's buying the CDs. He says he's engaged to a woman he loves very much, and all he wants to do is make her happy. He said that last week someone broke into her car and stole all of her CDs. She was really upset, and he wanted to make it up to her. He looked on Craigslist and found my listing and was really excited because I had a bunch of the CDs she used to have. Weird thing is, I didn't list any of the artists or bands because I was lazy, but I didn't think about that at the time. Anyway, he said he was getting it for her as a Christmas surprise. He said he was staying with his future in-laws somewhere nearby, and that their family barbecue ran really late, which is why he never made it at 8 p.m. By this point, I've lost interest and say something along the lines of, "That's sweet. Next time you should probably call or text the Craigslist instead of just showing up." I hand him the CDs, he hands me the cash and I go back inside. 3 days later, I start getting texts from an unknown number.
"Hey, I don't know my way around this town. Care to tour guide? I could really use a massage. Where can I get a massage in this town? You're Asian. Do you do massage? Would you take $40 for a 1-hour massage? Happy ending?"
Me, finally. Who the fuck is this? Him.
"Oh, sorry, I bought the CDs from you the other day. Do you squirt?"
I didn't respond, obviously. I show my friends that night and we all laugh it off. Then, the next day, I get more texts.
"I still have your address. I'm at the Bank of America near your neighborhood. I just got the $40, babe. Only 3 minutes away. Are you home? You fucking cunt, stop ignoring me. I'm almost there."
I immediately ran downstairs to tell my dad and mum. It was nighttime, so we shut off all of the lights outside and inside my house. My mum, little brother and I went into my parents' room, in the back of the house. My dad hid behind the curtains at the front bay window with a shovel in his hands. A few minutes later, I heard him run down the front hallway, fling the front door open and run outside. We heard some faint shouting, so we all walked out of the bedroom. By that time, my dad came back in with his shovel, his face red and his hair all disheveled. Apparently, the guy came driving down our street really slowly. My dad recognized the car and went running outside with the shovel, yelling obscenities at the guy. The guy peeled off and never came back or texted me again. Second guy. I was moving from Florida to DC and was going to load up my car as much as I could with stuff. However, I lived on the 3rd floor, plus a bit of a walk from my assigned parking spot. So I figured I could use some help. I posted an ad on Craigslist gigs. I said I was looking for someone to help me load some heavy items like TV, desk, etc. in my car. Less than an hour's worth of work and I'd pay $45 or whatever. I give the very first responder my number and address and he shows up. He was probably 5'8" and 350 pounds of pure fat. The sweat and smell coming off of this guy in the Florida heat was pretty nauseating, but I didn't care, as long as he did the job right. While he was carting heavy stuff, I was loading lighter things. Whenever I'd go upstairs and grab another load, he'd hurry after me so he could walk up the stairs behind me. I had the door propped open, so he didn't have to worry about me needing to unlock the door for him or anything. When he'd follow me up the stairs, he made these weird grunting noises like but I assumed it was because he was out of shape. Eventually, everything's loaded properly, save for some sweat smears on my stuff. I pay him and he drives off. I go back in my place and finish loading and cleaning. I go out maybe 45 minutes later to put another load in my car, and I see his truck is back, parked across the street from mine. He is sitting in the driver's seat, looking at me. When he sees me notice him, he looks away. I walk over to his window and knock. He rolls it down and I ask if he needs any help or if he was lost. I was really confused as to why he had come back, and I knew he didn't live near me. He didn't say anything, just rolled his window back up and drove off. Okay, whatever. Of course, 5 minutes later, my phone starts blowing up. I didn't recognize the number, so I don't answer the calls. Then, texts start rolling in. Him.
I bet you taste salty and sweet.
Me. Who is this? Him.
Your pussy. What are you up to tonight? Can I come back over?
I get this sinking feeling as the Craigslist guy. He had never called me about the job when I gave him my number, so I didn't know what his number was.
I like your pink panties.
Then I realize he was looking at my dress when I was walking up the stairs. I immediately feel like a total idiot for wearing a dress that day. He then started dialing my number over and over again. I didn't know how to do the block number thing through Sprint, so I had to just turn my phone off. Later, I was with my guy friend grabbing a bite and turned my phone back on. I got another text from the guy about how he wanted to toss me around like a rag doll and tie me up and make me beg for it. I show the text to my friend and tell him the story. The Craigslist creep then proceeds to start blowing up my phone again. So my friend answers and says he is going to cut his dick off and feed it to his dog if he ever contacts me again. I moved the next day, so I never had to worry about him randomly showing up in his truck again. Since then, I've bought and sold stuff on Craigslist, but I always make people meet me at a public place. I also stalk people's email addresses, Google Plus accounts, etc.
Hi, my name's Tom. I live in the St. Louis area, and this is a story about something that happened to me that almost ruined my life forever. When I was 21 years old, I broke up with my first ever serious girlfriend, who I had been together with for 8 months. Needless to say, I was devastated. I fell into a deep depression, and I began abusing painkillers and Xanax heavily. I began looking for any chick I can find to rebound with. I ended up looking on the personal section on Craigslist, and I found an ad for a girl named Stephanie. We began talking. We arranged for her to come pick me up one night and we had intercourse, then decided to make it a regular thing. She was an older lady, about 35, a bigger girl, but she had her own apartment, plus enough money to keep me loaded on as much drugs and alcohol as I wanted. To be honest, I kind of used this lady as my sugar mama, for a better lack of a word. After a while, she grew very attached to me and started to want a more serious relationship. Eventually, she started dropping hints about wanting to get married. She said she wanted to do this to help me by getting me on her insurance. That way she can get me help for my drug and alcohol problem, which I refused to consider. One day, we got into a big argument. She told the police that I had been abusing her and got a temporary restraining order on me. A week after she did this, she called me crying her eyes out, saying, "Please forgive me, I love you," and all this other stuff. She said she wanted to come pick me up, buy me some dope, alcohol, and get me something to eat. So being the drug addict I am, of course I accepted. From the moment she picked me up, I noticed that she was acting kind of odd. She was usually very talkative, always on my ass about wanting to talk about this and that, but on this day, she was oddly quiet. When we got back to her apartment, after I walked in, she immediately pushed me on the couch, pulled my pants down, and we had intercourse. I had been getting bad vibes off of her the whole night, so after this happened, I immediately asked her for a ride back home, which she quickly agreed to. After I got dropped off at the house, I went inside and sat down by my sister to watch some SpongeBob with her. About 10 minutes after I was home, I got a call on the phone. I picked it up and to my surprise, a lady on the other end said, "This is the St. Louis County Police Department. We're going to need you to come outside and talk to you." I ran downstairs to hide my weed, pills, and then walked outside to figure out what the hell was going on. When I walked outside, there was about 7 different cops on my porch. They were all pointing tasers and guns at me. One of them hit me in the back of my leg with a nightstick, put me on the ground, and I was handcuffed. The cops then talked to my mom to get permission to go inside of the house, where they took a drug dog and began doing a thorough search of my room and basement area. None of the cops on the scene would tell me what was going on whenever I would ask why they were there. They told me I would have to talk to the detective at the station. When I got to the police station, I had a bombshell dropped on me. Apparently, this lady had accused me of kidnapping her and sexually assaulting her. She told the police that she had come to my house to return some of my stuff because we had just broken up, and that I had come out with a knife, put it to her throat, forced my way into her vehicle, went back to her apartment, and sexually assaulted her, repeatedly. Thankfully, I had remembered that we had made a couple stops on our way back to her apartment. She had gone inside of a gas station to get a couple of packs of cigarettes with me, so there is no way I could have kidnapped her. The police still swabbed me for DNA. They also took my clothes for evidence, and I was forced to spend the night in the St. Louis County Jail, wearing nothing but hospital scrubs. I was released the next morning, but my ordeal was far from over. This lady began constantly stalking me. She would call me every night at odd times from blocked numbers, either crying into the phone or just begging to talk to me. I also began seeing her vehicle quite a lot in the neighborhood, even though she lives nowhere close to me. I called the police about this a couple of times, but they didn't really seem to care. They told me I would have to go get a restraining order on her in order to make it stop. I wanted nothing to do with the court system though, because I have a criminal record, and I just decided to ignore her and hope that the problem would go away. After a couple months, she finally did stop bothering me as much. However, to this day, I sometimes get calls at 2 or 3 in the morning from blocked numbers, and every new girlfriend I get, she messages them on Facebook and tells them how I sexually assaulted her. Moral of the story: be careful who you meet online. Whether you're a guy or a girl, all it takes is one crazy person to completely ruin your life.
About 2 years ago, I moved into a new apartment. The walls were very thin, and because of the fire safety laws in my city, my bedroom had one window, which led into the living room, and none with outside access. The window will be important later. It was 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for the master tenant, and one spare which, at the time, was rented out by a pretty friendly guy. Well, friendly guy had issues with his work visa and had to move back to Canada last minute, leaving us about 2 weeks to find another roommate. Our quickest and easiest option was Craigslist. Due to my work schedule, I had no part in the selection process, but was content when the new roommate moved in a little later. He seemed a bit off, but friendly. He was a very tall, large guy, but pretty quiet, and not someone I wanted to go out of my way to hang with, but was okay to be around and be cordial with. About 2 weeks into his move-in, the master tenant left for Hawaii, leaving him and I alone in the home for the month-long duration of his stay. For the first few days, things are normal. All of a sudden, about 4 days into the trip, I am woken up at about 8 a.m. to a frantic knocking at my door. Roommate, we'll call him Kyle, is standing there when I open it, looking frazzled. He looks me dead in the eye and says,
"So do you want to tell me what went on last night?"
To which I was shocked and confused because I had come home from work at about 9 p.m. and immediately showered and went to bed. I explained this to him, and he tells me that he heard me screaming and arguing with someone in my room, that he saw me in the side alley out the window, arguing with our landlord, whom I'd never even seen at that point, that he heard people coming in and out of our house. I tell him no way, none of that ever happened. After staring at me a little longer, he leaves and doesn't bring it up again. The next morning, I wake up to the same thing. This time, he says he saw me arguing with my boyfriend. I was single at the time. Had seen me talking with our other roommate who's in Hawaii and asking me for the badge number of the officer I'd spoken to, since he had apparently seen me talking to a bunch of police as well. This time, I get angry and more or less tell him to cut this shit out because I'm not doing anything and don't know what he's talking about. He gets a weird look on his face and says,
"I think I had a seizure in my sleep. The next time that happens, call an ambulance."
and leaves for a bit, only to start knocking again about an hour later, and when I open up, Kyle repeats the exact same story verbatim. This happens once more before I tell him to leave me the fuck alone and leave for work. I go to work as normal and am reluctant to return that night, but am too tired to switch to an alternate location. Big mistake. About 1 a.m. I wake up to slamming doors. Kyle is pacing back and forth between his bedroom, the living room, and out the front door, walking in and out of each room, turning the lights on and off, mumbling angrily and slamming the doors. I can see his figure pacing back and forth through the frosted window in my room that leads to the living room. Since my room is dark, he cannot see inside. Suddenly, he screams,
"I can't live like this. Why are you doing this to me?"
I think he's on the phone and don't respond. A few moments later, he screams my name repeatedly, and I realize he's directing it towards me. I knew I had to get the fuck out of there. So I very quietly creep out of the bed and start getting dressed and packing a bag of clothes for work in the morning. I'm almost done when he screams,
"I hear you,"
and then charges over to my room, slapping the wall next to my door, but not touching the door itself. I look towards my window and see his shadow lean all the way forward, pressing his ear against the glass. I was terrified and sat completely still, unmoving. He eventually screams my name again and moves away from the window, and I hear him start pacing between rooms again. Now, my shoes are kept on a rack outside my door and not inside my room, so I know that when I leave, I'm going to need a moment to put them on. I decide to wait until his pacing takes him out of the front door again, at which time I planned to grab my shoes, put them on, and run. As I'm formulating this plan, the pacing stops. He screams,
"Do you want to fucking fight about this? Come out right now and we'll fight, I swear to God."
I'm a small 5-foot girl, and this guy is easily 3 times my size, so I am definitely not looking to fight, thanks. After a few minutes, he turns off all the lights, and I hear the door to his room open and close, followed by silence. I wait for a moment to be sure I can't hear any movement, and then decide to take my chance. I took a deep breath and pulled my door open quickly. I step out and grab my shoes before I look up a second later and see him standing shirtless with just a pair of boxers and socks on in the dark of the hallway. His arms hung slightly outward in an awkward position. He says in a low, calm voice,
"Ma'am, we need to talk."
That was a hard no from me, so I grab my shoes and run out the door with them in hand. I run about a half block barefoot before I stop to put them on. When I look back, he is standing in the porch light of our front door, watching me run but not moving. Luckily, I had a friend who lived 2 blocks away, and I had their spare key, so I let myself in and crashed there for the night, and that's where I stayed for the next week or so while we worked things out with the master tenant, and Kyle agreed to move out within the week. He says he doesn't remember anything that happened or wasn't sure if it was real or not. But if I said that's what went down, then it must be real. The day Kyle left, he sends me a photo of the house keys sitting on the table and says,
I'm out.
and nothing else. I take a friend over there with me to scout it and ensure that he has actually left. When we get there, we discover that not only had he left a ton of food and furniture, but he had ripped all of the fire alarms out of the ceilings. He had unscrewed and removed the deadbolt to the front door and left them lined up neatly on the front table. We then realize that my front door can only lock by using a key from the outside, and it had been locked when we arrived, meaning Kyle still had a key. We called a locksmith immediately. Even after changing the locks, I was still terrified to stay there alone afterwards, and never went to sleep at night without barricading the doors with chairs and other furniture. To this day, I still fear for his safety. He was obviously psychologically unstable, but also wonder what could have happened if I hadn't been as lucky as I was.
In 2007, I went on a date with a guy from Craigslist. I was 17 years old at the time. I put an ad up looking to meet someone. I don't remember the details. A guy responded who lived close to me, so I emailed him back and gave him my number. He was actually one of the only ones who responded without a creepy message. He said his name was John and he was 26 years old. This guy, John, and I spoke for 2 days before meeting, and we met on a Friday night. We texted back and forth and he asked if I was single. I said yes. He asked what kind of food I like to eat because he wanted to take me to a restaurant. I asked him a few more questions about himself. He told me he still lived with his mother but had the top floor to himself and that he was a part-time model that made good money. Judging by his picture, him being a model was fairly believable. So on Friday night, John comes to pick me up. He drove a silver 2-door car, I want to say a Ford. He popped me a message to say he was outside, and after checking my hair and makeup one last time, I said goodbye to my parents, telling them I was heading out with a friend. I got into John's car and the first thing I noticed was that he looked exactly like his photo, the tall, dark, and handsome type. He had pale skin with dark hair and dark eyes. He looked a little older in person but made that up with a snappy fashion sense. He looked cool and cute. He was incredibly kind and his body language and smile totally put me at ease. Yes, it's really stupid to go on a date from Craigslist, but surprisingly this guy was normal. We chatted for a while as he started driving away from my hometown, towards the highway. He wanted to drive us into the city to go to dinner, which wasn't far, around a 25-minute journey. John started to reveal more details about himself to me on this journey. He told me he was embarrassed to tell me he lived with his mother, that I might think bad of him for not having his own place at his age. John got closer and closer to the highway, and I can't tell you what it was. I won't make this up because I don't remember, but it wasn't anything remotely creepy. I just felt put off by him. You know when you're on a date with someone and you're not sure, and then they tell you something that's your biggest turnoff? It was that kind of situation. Again, he didn't say anything too creepy, just off-putting. As we're getting closer and closer to the turnoff, I tell this perfectly nice guy, "I'm really sorry, I don't feel like going to dinner anymore. I'm not feeling well." John's initial reaction was sympathy. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Is it my driving?" I told him I just didn't feel well. John kept asking me, "What did I say? What did I do?" I told him it's not him, it's me. I wanted to go home because I felt ill. Then he said, "Okay, let me just drive around for a bit before I take you back. I don't want to end the evening like this." I knew that without him driving me home, I'd have to walk over an hour, maybe more. So I told him that driving for a bit sounded like a fine idea. But instead of him turning around and going back towards mine, he veered off and started heading to the town I knew he lived in. I should mention it was pitch black out, and the town where John lived was surrounded by dense wood. This isn't even worth mentioning if you take the highway and proper turnoffs to get there, but he decided he wanted to go via the back roads because it's more scenic, despite the fact I couldn't see a thing. John had gone from being incredibly talkative to almost completely silent. He kept driving further into the wooded area. A few times I'd ask him questions about himself to break the awkward silence. At one point I put my hand on his knee, affectionately, trying to regain the friendly, flirty banter we'd had earlier. He blanked me for the most part, occasionally answering in soft grunts or nods. It's like he was having a tantrum. John pulled into the parking lot for the forest. It was around 9 a.m., so naturally it was totally empty. He slowly kept driving, looking around for other cars, then parked himself up right at the end, close to the woods. There was nobody else in the parking lot, and I hadn't even seen us pass other cars to get there. For 10 minutes, he just sat there, staring into the woods ahead, which was disturbing. I think I managed to make small talk for maybe 5 minutes, which is a long time when someone isn't talking back. Then I joined him in his silence. I was afraid of appearing fake. I didn't want him to think I was scared. Some time of silence goes past, and abruptly John gets out of the car, closes the door, and locks the car. I was stuck inside. His lights were on so I could sort of see ahead. In front of the car was a field that maybe went on for about 20 feet, and then beyond that were trees and dense forest. To the left was the rest of the car park and exit at the far end, and to the immediate right was more forest with a small path. John disappeared into the forest ahead. I tried the handle on the door. Wouldn't open. I began to rationalize this. Maybe he accidentally locked the door. I was telling myself if he really wanted to do something, he'd have stayed in the car. With no sight of John, I decided I needed to call someone. I looked around for my phone and I couldn't find it. This was an old silver pay-as-you-go flip phone. I was confused that I couldn't find it because I had put it right next to me in the cup holder. After looking for it for a good few minutes, I became sure that he had taken it. Mind you, I didn't want to start rooting around his car, knowing he might be watching me. I didn't want him to catch on I was freaking out. At that point, I started looking for my phone with only my eyes, instead of making it obvious. I was petrified this guy was watching me, panic in the darkness. My eyes were darting all around the floor. Nothing. I looked up and squinted into the field and forest ahead. I saw him. John was standing about 10 feet from the car, on that small field. He was standing and smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. He looked freaky. This was not the same guy I got in the car with. I looked ahead and smiled back. I was still trying to act like his behavior was normal, like nothing he was doing was scary. Still smiling, his tongue began to protrude from his mouth. He stuck it all the way out. He began wagging his tongue up and down while maintaining eye contact with me. I felt myself trembling. I was trying to compose myself. Not taking his eyes off of me, and with his tongue still out, he started unzipping his pants. He took out his penis and proceeded to urinate in front of me while staring the whole time. This is the point I found it difficult to act like I was still in on his behavior. I looked down at the floor, not wanting to watch what was in front of me. He didn't creep or slick back into the car. Instead, I hear his thundering steps and then a slam against the window. I guess at this point, I was the luckiest person alive because another car pulled into the parking lot. I don't know what this did to John, but immediately he got back into the car and laughed at me, that normal laugh, and said, "So what music do you like? I'll put it on and drive you home." And he did. He drove me all the way home. When we pulled up to my house, I went for the door, but it was still locked. "I want you to promise me something." I asked him what it was. If you ever see me after this, turn the other way. Act like you don't know me. If you see me with my family, don't you dare say a word. I don't expect to bump into you, but don't say anything." I agreed, then asked him, "Have you seen my phone?" He told me no. I guess my phone was a small sacrifice for surprisingly making it home okay. When I got in, I said goodnight to my parents and went upstairs to my room and turned on my computer. I wanted to gather as much information about this guy as I could. Back then, I used MSN Messenger. It logged in automatically whenever I started up my PC. Now, before I get into the final part of this story, it's important you know this. One day before, I had been at my best friend's house. We had the kind of friendship where it was like, who could pick on the other the most? It was all good fun and we mostly just ripped the shit out of each other and had a laugh. The day before, she had changed 2 contacts in my phone, replaced the contact Mom with a guy I had been sending sexual texts back and forth with. I immediately knew she had done this because I saw the previous messages come up, but I didn't change the numbers back at the time, thinking I'd do it later. So when I logged onto MSN, I had a ton of messages from this guy and a few from my best friend. When John had locked me in the car, he had taken my phone and texted Mom, telling her that, "I'm sorry, but I decided to move out. I've met someone. Please don't look for me. I'm happy being left alone." So another thing about the message was that it was all written in text speak. Swap please for PLZ, for example, and this guy knew I never texted like that. Aside from the message itself, this was a big red flag. He had texted me back, ? Before texting again saying, "I don't think this is you. Know where you went. Calling the police." This was incredibly quick thinking as he had absolutely no idea where I was. I think that text saved my life that night, and it explains John's sudden change of behavior. If it wasn't for the random car, it was the text. Afterwards, we tried to find this guy online by name and by email. Couldn't find anything. It seemed everything on him was fake. My best friend pressed me to call the police, but I never did because I feared the retribution I'd get from my parents for going on a date with a guy I didn't know. My best friend ended up betraying my trust and telling my mom anyway, who still didn't call the police but instead did what I expected and banned me from my PC, going out while also calling me an idiot. There was something else too. Turns out this guy's first name was John, and he did in fact live in the town he said he did. Around 3 years later, I started going out with a guy from that very town named Chris. We were talking about exes one day and I told him about my creepy encounter. I didn't even get halfway through the story before he stopped me and started asking questions about what John looked like, how old he looked, and how old he said he was, etc. Turns out he knew him. This guy was now in prison for attacking, sexually assaulting, and beating a 14-year-old girl bloody in a nearby park. She survived without long-term injury. That was just what he was in prison for though. My friend told me he was well known for being a creep way before that, and his friends even called him Creepy John. He would go around the nearby parks where he knew the younger girls would hang out and would ask them to get in his car and take their photo. He would always tell them he was a model too. My boyfriend at the time first met him when he was 12 because John decided to take up skateboarding and try to make friends with lots of the younger boys in the skate park. He couldn't believe I'd actually gotten the car with him. Anyway, that's my story about possibly being beaten, murdered, or sexually assaulted. Hope you enjoyed. If anyone is wondering, yes, the guy is still in prison today.